Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report powered by ENCA.com. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. The Americans are talking about us again, and a committee in the American government has advanced a bill for a wider vote on whether or not to place individual sanctions on ANC members and members of the South African government. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk what this actually means, whether or not it's just going to affect individuals within the ANC and the government or the wider South African public. We're going to talk about the reasons that these Americans are giving for why they are trying to punish and inconvenience these South African leaders because they are very revealing. And we're going to talk about why these Americans might be doing this, because it turns out there is funding behind all of these American individual politicians who are now very upset at, for example, South Africa's stance against what Israel is continuing to do to Gazans in Palestine and Palestinians in the West Bank, to be fair. We're going to get into all of that. We have got a lot else to talk about, though. There's a picture going around South African Twitter that purports to show Gayton, Mckenzie and Kunene standing with one of the people, that Santon businessman, Katie Molefe, who Kunene was at the house of, purports to show them all standing together. And it turns out that the claim of that picture is fake nonsense, lies, and fake news. But what is equally bizarre about this is how badly Grok, the AI chatbot on Twitter that Elon Musk created and tampered with, how badly Grok got it wrong, and how it seems like, arguably much like Elon Musk, Grok can't tell black people apart, because in different responses that Grok gave to people asking it who's in these photos, all manner of different black South Africans and colored South Africans who are not Katie Molefe, Gayton, Mckenzie, or Kenny Kunene were mentioned. We're going to get into that. But before all of that, before the WhatsApp line, before everything else, we have a new news story for the Yo scale, Eric. And a lot of people have been sending us messages in the comments and on the WhatsApp line about what we should call it, how it should work, if it's your first time coming across it. We've basically figured out that South Africans express their shock at the wildness of something happening with the number of Yo's on them. And now a lot of people, and you'll hear on the WhatsApp line, a lot of people with different suggested names for the Yo meter, or the Yo bometer apparently is one that we're going to get into maybe. But the Yo scale is the measure of how many Yos a story deserves based on how shocking it is. And we have a new one. Just quickly, Colleen Makhubele, she's only been the chief whip of the MK party for 4 months. If you've been watching this show, you'll know all of the scandal and controversy around that. Yesterday, as head of the MK party, she, by a mistake, voted for the Appropriation Act, even though MK has tried to block that act at every turn, including voting against all of the departmental budgets that had to be approved to allow the Appropriation Act to happen. And then she said, sorry, I thought we were voting on the General Mkhize thing. I voted the wrong way. I misunderstood. I've only been doing this for 4 months. That is so amateur hour, it almost breaks my brain. You're the chief whip of the third largest party in South Africa, technically the leader of the opposition. You're the chief whip, and you voted the wrong way. You voted for an act that your party has made it its whole identity to be against. How many Yos on the Yo scale is that, Eric?
I'm going to give it 3, and I'll tell you why. I've got reasoning. Yeah, I have reasoning, because by the end of some of the clips, you will see that the Speaker of the House is also confused.
Yeah, they're like, wait, no.
And it feels...
You don't mean that.
And I'm pretty sure he says that you've changed your vote 3 times. And I'm going to give it 3 yours for that reason. There we go, yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good. You can let us know on the WhatsApp line. And particularly once you've heard the comments on the WhatsApp line about our Yo scale. But I just had to get that out of the way up front. So you can watch the full episode, including the WhatsApp line and all of our stories, or the full episode of every single one of these quarter reports, only at ENCA.com. Link is in the description. And while you're there, down in the description, the other link is to www.3beaniesnetwork.com. So many people are now buying merch of Settle Down, Brother, and Quarter Report, and I guess 3 Beanies Network Universe related merch. Go and get yours now. We ship all over the country. It's affordable, it's fun, and a lot of people are enjoying the merch that they're getting. All right. Earlier this week, a committee in the United States government's House of Representatives called the Foreign Affairs Committee passed what they're calling the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025. This is something they've been threatening to do for a long time. You will remember in the last few years, many different American politicians, mainly from the Republican side, saying that they're cross with South Africa with what we've been doing on the world stage. They're cross with our friendships with Russia and China. They're cross that we are in BRICS. They're cross that we kind of trade with everyone and maintain broad neutrality on most issues. They're cross that we refuse to side with America or Russia or China, but just chat with everybody. And they're particularly furious about our case in the International Court of Justice of genocide against Israel for the horrors that they continue to commit on Palestinians. And they've been fomenting that for a long time. This now is the point where that committee has finally passed this resolution. Mostly Republicans voted for it. So if you are interested, it's 34-16 for and against. 28 Republicans and 6 Democrats supported it. And all the 16 who were against it were Democrats. And so you can understand that this is mainly a MAGA Trump American move. And what it's going to do is it's going to then, if it passes a broader vote, right? Because similar to South Africa's governmental system, once something passes a committee, it then has to be voted through on a broader scale and in a full assembly of the American government's elected representatives. If that then passes, then the Trump administration will conduct a full review of the relations between the US and South Africa. What this committee vision is that potentially South African government and ANC leaders be sanctioned under something called the Global Magnitsky Act, which is an American thing. And it's very important to understand what it is and what it isn't. So it's not sanctions on South Africa. It's sanctions on individuals deemed guilty of human rights abuses or corruption. And those individuals can be financially punished, like having sanctions against them directly and their ability to spend money, make money, and have offshore investments and trade money in the world. But it's also visa restrictions. So we have seen this, like American governments put this on all kinds of people around the world, Russians in particular in recent times. And essentially, the core is that the bill would require the U.S. administration, as reported by the Daily Maverick, to determine if South Africa has undermined U.S. national security or foreign policy interests. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, but just at the very start, we need to understand a few things. One, the two things I said are very different. On the one hand, U.S. national security or foreign policy interests is essentially saying we'll punish South Africa or South African leaders for acting in ways that are against the foreign policy of the United States, essentially punishing South Africa for doing things that the US doesn't like being in BRICS or like having open relations with Russia, having open relations with China. There are many countries in the world that have different foreign policies and different allyships to the United States, but the specific targeting of South Africa comes as a part of a long-running now, years-long, and in Trump's case, 7-8 months long trend of America trying to turn South Africa into this deeply evil, terrible country that does terrible things and has this huge influence on the world stage, which it just, frankly, respectfully, we don't have. Like, I think that like this is the machination of trying to make it look like we as a country have far more influence than we do. We do have influence, but we are even small in BRICS, right? When you just compare economic influence and political influence. They're trying to turn us into a scapegoat. And as we have covered many times over the last 7 or 8 months, whenever Trump is in trouble and trying to distract and misdirect, he bashes South Africa. Now, it's not Trump this time. He's been trying to do everything else around the Epstein files and say, look over there, look over there. It's one of his people. But then national security and foreign policy interests is very different to deeming individuals guilty of human rights abuses or corruption. And now you will say, and it is correct, that a lot of ANC and South African government leaders are deeply, seriously implicated in corruption trials, corruption allegations, and have evidence against them. But there are literally thousands of politicians in countries around the world that America works with who are also implicated in corruption scandals, who are also seriously suspected of very corrupt dealings. And America is not moving to punish them. And then in terms of guilty of human rights abuses, I will be amazed if they find ANC leaders and South African government leaders guilty of human rights abuses. I think after that Johan Rupert and Cyril Ramaphosa orchestrated meeting in the White House, even the Americans have stopped talking about white genocide and farm murders and the refugees. This Republican who spoke, Ronnie Jackson, who we'll talk about in a second, did not mention that either of those things as the main things, the main reasons behind that. So let's talk about what he said right now. So he's a Texas Republican. Big supporter of Donald Trump, obviously. He said that South Africa claims to be non-aligned, which means we're friends with everybody, recently abandoned the US and its allies by increasingly aligning with America's adversaries like China, Russia, Iran, Iranian military proxies such as Hamas, talks about South Africa having Confucius Institutes, and he says, direct quote, South Africa is systematically going after our partners and allies. And then, crucially, he says, falsely accusing the state of Israel of genocide at the illegitimate International Criminal Court and mimicking Iran's disgusting dismissal of the atrocities committed by Hamas on October the 7th. And then at the end, he said extreme politicians from the ANC have led efforts to target Afrikaners. But the main thrust was the international foreign policy that he perceived South Africa as doing wrong. Now, a couple of things. One, very interestingly, and thank you, Daily Maverick, for reporting on this, as others have, Ronnie Jackson gets enormous funding from AIPAC, which is the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, an organization that raises huge amounts of money and donates it to politicians in America in exchange for them being nice to Israel. So I wonder why Ronnie Jackson has taken such a, how dare you, how very dare you, South Africa, said that Israel might be doing bad things in the face of the enormous weight of evidence of atrocities and human rights violations being committed against Palestinians in Gaza. How dare you? Could it be that he's being paid a fortune to do that? I think the answer is yes. And that's a really, really important contextualizer. The next thing to say, which is obvious, is that South Africa has consistently condemned the violence of October 7th. South Africa has not come out and said that was super chilled at all. South Africa has simply gone the extended, endless atrocities, US-funded, US military-supported, US planes, trains, automobiles, and bombs that have supplied Israel to commit horrors against defenseless Palestinians in Gaza, to this day as atrocious as it has been for the last over a year. We stand against that. And we are not going to allow that to continue without a moral judgment that our country uniquely can do, because our country uniquely had the apartheid superstructure and apartheid superstate, which allows us to see not just when genocide happens, but when apartheid is very clearly happening. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're trying to beat us with, that stick, because of the money being given to people like Ronnie Jackson to push that kind of narrative. And again, it's funny that this happens this week because Brazil has just announced that they are applying to join South Africa's case in the International Court of Justice against what Israel is doing. Other countries have done it too, like Spain, Turkey, and Colombia. The direct quote in Reuters is that the Brazilian government accused Israel of violations of international law, quote, such as the annexation of territories by force, and it expressed deep indignation at violence suffered by the civilian population. So maybe Brazil, along with Spain and Turkey and Colombia, is going to get sanctions from the United States, or at least their leaders will in the near future. But you can see that specifically South Africa is beaten with this rod in this moment as a political ploy from these United States politicians.
Out of the countries you just listed there, Brazil will probably be the one that I would, if I had to put money on it, would get sanctions, simply also by being aligned with BRICS, right? So
big player in BRICS.
Yeah.
Literally
so
the B.
That's very scary for the Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to understand deeply here that these sanctions are going to happen against individuals. If they do happen, they're not happening soon. But we need to understand how bankrupt, hypocritical, and bought and paid for the accusation against the South African leadership are. Okay, I'm not denying, and I've spoken at length about how the ANC has screwed up this country and how corrupt and self-serving and greedy and inconsiderate and uncaring for the lives of millions and millions of South Africa, the ANC leadership has overwhelmingly been for at least 20 years or at least 15 years. But it's not the allegations of corruption that the US are going after here. It's not the state of play in South Africa that the US are going after here. They're trying to make an example of people who are brave enough to stand up against what Israel is doing to Palestinians. They even said that the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are illegitimate. Remember, America has never signed on to either of those courts. They love to use those courts when those courts are calling out America's enemies. But the second America is called out, or America's allies are called out for horrific behavior, suddenly those courts are illegitimate. And by the way, the Americans are moving to sanction individual prosecutors and judges on those courts. Judges who are in those courts, which have been signed on to by hundreds of countries, so that they can mete out justice when countries do not pursue justice themselves. America is trying to punish and inconvenience and destroy the careers of those people. We need to understand what they're doing to South African leaders in the context of what these Americans are doing to all of these people.
I was going to add the usual way they do things when they are part of some kind of forum of any kind is it's just veto time, right? As soon as it's not in their favor.
Yeah.
So I guess now because of this, not necessarily being a part or signing on to
they don't have a veto.
They don't have the veto power. So, let's go after the individuals, I suppose.
Literally. So that's the true context and state of affairs, even if this does end up happening. But it is extremely unlikely that South Africa as a whole will suffer from this. Like we will suffer on the 1st of August in a week's time, unless something changes. And we will suffer from more explicit, like if America chooses to try and cut ties with us economically, that's different. But these going after ANC leaders and government leaders are not going to adversely affect average everyday South Africans the way that other things might. So that's all we need to know about that.